Good afternoon, everyone. Today's my presentation's topic is the wound that would not close. World War One, modernist fragmentation, and the echo of stream of consciousness and Dada in contemporary literature. Here is my academic detail and presentation details. Here is table of content. And the research question is how did the psychological and cultural devastation of World War One produce the fragmented aesthetics of stream of consciousness and Dada, and how do these forms persist in contemporary metamodernism literature? And hypothesis is the word did not merely inspire new style, it destroys the epistemological foundations, casual narrative, and the stable selfhood on which inherited literary form depended, making fragmentation the only honest formal response. The world the war ended. The pre 1914 English fiction assumed coherent casualty, purposefully narrative time, and the self capable of meaningful moral question. The formal guarantee of the realist novel depends on worldview of the trenches destroyed. In James and Sheshgiri established that 1940 witnessed a moment of aesthetic metamorphosis with the subsequent integrate ruptured literary architecture of the wasteland Ulysses and to the lighthouse rendered inseparable for cultural devastation. De Koven argues that modernist fiction contains the contradictory double imperative to represent history and society and at the same time nor deny them. This doubleness, the war both demanding representation and exceeding available forms, is the precise site at which stream of consciousness turns inward and Dada turns outward in simultaneous refusal of inheritive narrative. The trench as the origin of ironic form. In Fussel's article, Sassoon notes that the war was mainly a matter of hole and ditches. And the irony of the grammar and the modern memory. Fussel's central claim in the book of the Great War and the Modern Memory, there seemed to be one dominating form of modern understanding, that it is essentially ironic and that it originates largely in the application of mind and memory to the events of the Great War. The stream of consciousness, the trench interior render into prose form. Woolf, Mrs Dalloway places the shell-locked veterans Septimus Warren Smith alongside Clarissa Dalloway to enact the war invasion of civilian consciousness. Fussell established that at the front, soldier notice and the treasured sensory detail purely for their own sake under the convict that every moment might be their last. This extreme perceptual alertness is precisely the phenomenological condition stream of consciousness render. De Koven argues that modernist contradictory double imperative to represent or deny history simultaneously generates the form double structure of modernist fiction. Cole reads the Westland as the providing a robust theory of violence and art, arguing that literary modernism was fully entangled in its deepest commitment not only with the war but also with the long history of violence. Levery's analysis of Will Self's umbrella shows how contemporary metamodernist fiction continue this mode. Dada at the Cabaret Voltaire. Dada, founded in Zurich in 1916 at the height of the Somme slaughter, performed the logical conclusion of war's assault on mourning. Millard established that the Dada avail itself of the current artistic vocabulary. Hugo Boss let go at the Cabaret Voltaire enact what calls the disenchanted mode, an active stripping away of the idealizing principles that had allowed official language to describe the sum as substantial progress. Fussell analysis of the field service postcard, which allowed no wording other than I am quite well, and continued no provision for reporting death or wounds. Millard notes that Dada method constituted much of the attempts to introduce into art and contemporary equivalent of literary content. Virginia Woolf and the shell-shocked interior. Woolf places fragmentation questions alongside Clarissa Dalloway to argue that the war had invaded civilians' life as a structure condition, not merely as historical event. If we see the difference between stream of consciousness versus Dadaism, the direction of the stream of consciousness is inward, while the Dada has outward. The target of stream of consciousness is official narrative, time, and casual coherence, while Dadaism officially language, grammar, syntax, and institutional optimism. If war connection, we see stream of consciousness, shell shock as a cognitive method, which is found in Mrs Dalloway. In Dadaism, some slaughter as a proof that rational civilization and fraudulent. And key quote like Cole in his article, fully entangled with the war. In the Dadaism, Millard notes that puns cannot outlive the language that gives rise to them. If we see history buried in forms, D. Cohen argues that modernist writers face a contradictory double imperative. This formal paradox history that cannot be stated directly but can not be omitted generates the what D. Cohen calls the Wounder's dialectical transfer. Vogelang's analysis of Robinson's fiction confirms his structural argument. Robinson's use of the permeable, unstable houses as modernist metaphor negotiate fragments and walls, interior and the exterior in the way that sustains historical anxiety without naming its source. Gilligan's reading of Amer's McBride's make the same point more explicitly. The formal separation D. Cohen identified the Woolf and the Joyce is therefore not historical residues in metamodernist fiction. It is a Gilligan shows a living response to present crisis whose epistemological structure mirrors that of 1914. Metamodernism as the Wound's contemporary name. James and Sheshgiri defines metamodernism through its experimental fiction shaped by an aesthetics of discontinuity, nonlinearity, interiority, and chronological play. And Bentley argues that novels like Cloud, Atlas, and the NW gesture toward recognition relationship between absolute cynic and postmodernism without achieving a clean break because they remain structurally brilliant and very ironic mode that World War I installed as modern understanding. If we see T.S. Eliot and Disenchanted Ruin in the Wasteland, the fragment heap of broken images is not metaphor, it is the form enchanted. If we see critical reflection, what argument established and what not, the argument hold most firmly for the claim that stream of consciousness and Dada share common epistemologic origin in the war destruction of casual narrative and state stable selfhood, like Cole, Fussell, and D. Cohen together establish this with considerable precision. What the argument cannot settle is the whether contemporary writers employ fragmentation because of war's formal inheritance or because they face analogous epistemological crisis independently. In conclusion, World War I did not merely inspire new literary style, it destroyed the epistemological foundation that coherent narrative form required, making fragmentation and the honest formal response available to writers who survived. D. Cohen suppressed referent mechanism explain why the war persists in the form rather than content. To read modernism as the contemporary experiment of writing honestly, it is to recognize that formally innovation is always also a moral response to what language has been made to conceal. Here is my references and thank you. Now questions are welcome.
So my question is that how does the fragmented nature of social media influence stream of consciousness writing today?
If we see in the old literature, author uses the stream of consciousness fragmentation to go to the deeper into characters, trauma, and psychological state. In today's social media culture, if writers uses it intentionally because they want to show us the live culture in the day of whole day of scrolling and social media over information, we we are flatter state, we are divided into many thoughts and culture, so we can connect it with that. Any other question?
So my question is, did colonial soldiers who fought in World War I also use fragmented writing styles to describe their experience?
If we see in time of World War One, European writer uses fragmentation and stream of consciousness because they want to rebellion against the Victorian structure. And if we see the writing style of colonial soldier like India and Africans, he wrote it in fragmented style, but not because as a art, but they are divided and the deculturalization because they fought from the French and the other country and they feel fragmented from the homeland, so they write in fragmented way. Thank you.